Coming off Abu Dhabi 2020, Max's dominant win raised eyebrows. For the first time in years, Mercedes looked vulnerable. That performance sparked whispers. Was Red Bull finally closing the gap? As we rolled into 2021, preseason testing in Bahrain hinted that maybe, just maybe, the balance of power was about to shift. But as fans, we know testing is full of smoke and mirrors. The stopwatch rarely tells the full truth. Red Bull looked sharp. Max topped the final day. The RB16B dancing over bumps and crosswinds without fuss. Mercedes, not so smooth. Bottas lost most of day one to reliability issues, while Lewis looked uncomfortable. Red twitchy and traction was uncertain. Well, headlines declared Red Bull might finally be faster. But, well, deep down, we all thought it's Mercedes. They always hide pace until it really matters. On Bahrain qualifying day, the whispers became louder. Max stormed to pole, 1 minute 28 seconds, .997, nearly 4 tenths faster than Lewis. Bottas lineup, P3, Pérez had a shocker knockout in Q2 on mediums and later forced to start from the pit lane after electronics reset on the formation lap in the race. Max's lap wasn't even perfect, running tiny bit wide in turn 13, yet still comfortably ahead. Mercedes simply didn't have the single lap pace it seemed. Race day. Start. Lewis and Max both started with mediums. Lewis pressured Max, but Max held firm. Bottas settled in behind. Pérez began his recovery from the pit lane. Lewis pit early for hards on lap 13, trying the classic undercut. Max stayed longer. Max pit and takes medium on lap 17, but the undercut worked. He lost track position to Lewis. Lap 28, Lewis pit for hards again. Lap 30, Bottas suffers a disastrous 10-second stop. Yeah, Bottas and these pit stops in 21. That's enough story. His race is effectively done from there. Lap 39, Max pits for the final time. Pressure tires, pressure hards. 8.5 seconds to close in 16 laps. The chase was on. Max reeled Lewis rapidly with 5 laps to go. He overtook off track at turn 4 and he had to hand it back. Drama. That was probably one of the only errors Max made throughout the season. I can think of 1 or 2, but that's about it. Lewis held on by just 7.5 tenths after 57 laps. Let's just have a qualitative look into drivers' performance there. Hamilton versus Verstappen. Well, Lewis was visibly slower on outright pace, but seemed like a flawless execution by both him and the team with strategy, pit stops, and Lewis especially defending on all tires. For Max, I think he was the faster car in clean air, but questionable strategy and that track limits cost him the win. Bottas versus Lewis. Bottas had somewhat similar road pace to Lewis, but his race was effectively ruined by that pit stop. Pérez versus Max. From pit lane to P5, he really showed strong pace and time management, but didn't really get close to Max's speed. But still, he wasn't far behind Bottas. After all, it was his first season with Red Bull, and Bottas is not to be taken lightly in a Mercedes. For Pérez to be that close in race 1 with Red Bull showed that there was something strong in RB16B. So, Bahrain gave us the first test of 2021. Red Bull seemed to have the faster car on road pace. Seemed to have. Max ahead in qualifying and stronger in clean air. It seemed Mercedes executed perfect race, showing why they dominated the sport in the past 6 years. Now, to keep this objective, I'll be putting up our structured points framework. Let's apply it and see how our first data points would look. 1. Fastest laps in comparable stints. I'm going to take first medium stint for both Max and Lewis. With Mazepin's crash and spins, we had safety cars, VSCs, also drama at start. So I'm taking lap 6 to 10. I'm taking field corrected laps. Both Max and Lewis had similar, almost identical medium tires, with Lewis averaging 1 minute 33.548 and Max averaging 1 minute 33.449. Max was about 1/10 faster, but Lewis was in the dirty air. Then I'm taking Lewis's last stint with hards, lap 32 to 36, avoiding the overtaking laps. Those are 3 laps all hards. The average lap time is 1 minute 33.608. To take a similar stint from Max, it's his last stint with hards as well. The laps I take from 45 to 49. I avoided the brief yellow flag and crazy outlap by Max. The hards are 5 laps old. Also keep in mind that this is the period Max started chasing that 8 seconds gap. So he was in full push mode and the average lap time was 1 minute 33.405. And from these two stints, Lewis averaged 1:33.578 and Max is slightly faster with an average of 1:33.427. Max was 1.5 tenths ahead of Lewis. In our matrix, the car needs 2 tenths clearance to get 2 points, so no one gets points from this. We can't see a clear car advantage. Max was faster, but he was mostly in clean air on an aggressive strategy. Number 2, race-based consistency, the standard deviation factor. Comparing Lewis versus Max, the idea is to give points to whichever car had the steadier lap spread across the race according to the criteria. Lewis's average lap spread standard deviation was 8.051 seconds, and it was 7.905 seconds for Max. Max was better with 0.146, almost half ten advantage. This is nothing across the race, and we need to see at least 3/10 of a gap to offer any points to a car, so no car gets points here either. Number 3, teammate factor. As I said in the first video, I added a pre-rule here. I was thinking about this a bit more and decided to add this eligibility factor. This is like the qualifying 107% rule. So now this matrix will only be applied if the second driver to be within at least 3 seconds to the main driver. If he's beyond that, it indicates more of a driver problem. Either the driver is not clicked with the car in that race or the car is built around the other driver. Regardless, in this case, it will not be fair to penalize or reward a car for that. In Bahrain's case, Pérez was down by almost 3.3 seconds to Max's lap spread, so I have to unfortunately omit this from points. Just for reference, Bottas was also better by 2.4 seconds on the lap spread of Pérez, which should have resulted in 3 points for Mercedes, but I don't think it's right. It is the first race after all for Pérez, but hopefully we won't see this as much as we go along the season. Number 4, teammate beating the opposition leader. If Pérez had beaten Lewis or Bottas beaten Max on merit, the team would score 3 points. On merit means no accidents, penalties, grid drops, or any funny event. In Bahrain, that didn't happen, so no points for anyone. Feels weird. So far, we have no points for anyone. I mean, it shows how close the cars were, essentially. Number 5, we are into qualifying points. Again, if you remember the first video, I made a last minute change here. Instead of getting the last lap on the board, I'm gonna take the fastest sector times and add them up to get the hypothetical fastest lap for everyone. It is going to be the basis for all qualifying point comparisons. This should reflect the car's potential better, at least in my opinion. Max's hypothetical fastest lap is his spot lap. He did all his fastest sectors in that lap, which was 1 minute 28.997 for Lewis. I had to pick the second sector from somewhere. I think it was from Q2. His lap would have been 1 minute 29.251. All of a sudden, Max only has 2.5 tenths gap. The gap doesn't seem as looming as the final pole laps with a gap of almost 4 tenths that we saw on the board. Our criterion says we need at least 3 tenths to offer any points, so no points here either. This was the point that I was expecting for Red Bull. That was a surprise. Max just nailed all 3 sectors in one lap that mattered. Next, point base. If Bottas or Pérez had taken pole, 2 points for that team, but it didn't happen. And if Bottas had out-qualified Max or Pérez had out-qualified Lewis, again, based on the imaginary fastest laps, another 2 points for the team, but that didn't happen either. Now, in the first 6 races, we have this. If Bottas was half second ahead of Pérez in qualifying in that imaginary lap, Mercedes gets a point. And if Pérez out-qualified Bottas at all in the first 6 races, Red Bull gets a point. In fact, Bottas was miles ahead, but Pérez was out in Q2. We have a rule that everyone must make it to Q3. So essentially, we are not considering any Bottas-Pérez point comparisons. Wow, that's a lot of math. But what did we get? No points for either team. I really didn't see that coming. I feel like I did all those for nothing. No, it actually tells us an important story. I really thought Red Bull had a much stronger car compared to Mercedes in Bahrain, with Max's monstrous gap in qualifying and catching Lewis in the race. It signaled Red Bull was quicker, but in reality, they were much closer. The 2 cars were much closer than we thought it was. What do you think? Let me know if you agree or if you think I should make any changes to the matrices. Yeah, that's gonna be helpful. Next is Imola. That was a crazy race, wasn't it? We saw Lewis making mistakes left and right and a masterclass from Max. Anyway, I won't put it up saying Max had the faster car. Instead, I'm going to dive deep into it. I might make a change or 2 after digging into all the numbers so that we give wet racers a fair chance, unlike FIA. That's it from Bahrain. See you in wet Imola. Bye.